In this example, I'm given sign conventions for I1 and I2 on this diagram. So the arrow directions given here correspond to what should be interpreted as positive values. So these guys are giving me what are assumed or reference directions. These directions or these references are arbitrary. But once I choose this sign convention, I need to stick with it or else I'll get confusion relative to what directions the currents are actually in. For part A, I'm given that I1 is positive 3 amps. That means I have 3 amps entering the positive terminal. None of my circuit elements can accumulate charge. That means the current leaving this element has to balance the current entering the element. So I have positive 3 amps leaving the lower element. Now let's compare that to my sign convention on I2. I2 is positive entering the lower terminal. This arrow is in the opposite direction of the direction that the current is actually going in, so I change the sign on this value to get I2. The arrows have changed direction, so the sign on the current has to change. For part B, I1 is negative 2 amps. I1 is defined positive going into the upper terminal, so I have negative 2 amps entering the upper terminal. I have to balance that with the same amount of current leaving the lower terminal, so I have negative 2 amps leaving the lower terminal. I want to find I2. Positive I2 corresponds to current entering the lower terminal. That's the opposite direction of the arrow I have relative to the negative 2 amps, so I have to change the sign on the current, and in this case I2 is positive 2 amps. The arrow direction changed, so the sign on the number has to change. I can always do a problem in a different way. So let's take another look at part B. If I have negative 2 amps entering the upper terminal, I can change the sign on this current and change the direction of the current. That means I have positive 2 amps leaving the upper terminal. Again, I have to balance that with the same amount of current entering the lower terminal, so I have positive 2 amps entering the lower terminal. My sign convention is that I2 is positive entering the lower terminal. This arrow and this arrow are going in the same direction, so now I don't have to change my sign on this number, and I2 is equal to positive 2 amps. The results, however, are exactly the same as they should be. We can play games with our signs, but as long as we're consistent, we'll get to the same final number.